Hi, my name's Alden. After Mom passed, my wife crawled into bed with my stepfather, then took half of everything I ever built. The judge handed her our $2.8 million ranch like I was nothing. "You're a failure," she spat, and he looked me dead in the eye and said, "Bastard, get off my land." That night, I was drinking alone, thinking maybe they were right, until the phone rang. "Mr. Kelm, we've been trying to reach you, for 10 years. A Swiss bank, a $99 million account. But that money? It wasn't a gift. It was a warning." So what happens when the man they buried comes back with everything? The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through my skull. I sat there in the Harris County Courthouse, staring at the polished wood table in front of me as if it could swallow me whole. The judge's words were crisp, almost casual. "The property at issue, valued at $2.8 million, is hereby awarded to Marla Whitlow." My chest tightened. That ranch wasn't just land. It was my sweat, my father's legacy, the place I thought I'd build the rest of my life. And just like that, it was gone. I heard a chair slide, heels clicking against marble. Marla leaned down as she gathered her things. Her perfume, sharp, sweet, cloying, hit me before her words did. She bent close, lips barely moving, and whispered, "You're pathetic, Alden." The words didn't need volume. They carved into me sharper than any lawyer's argument. My throat dried up, but I refused to let her see me flinch. She straightened, smirked at Ira, my stepfather of all people, and the two walked out together. Ira didn't even bother to glance at me. I stayed seated long after the courtroom emptied, papers scattered in front of me, the sound of shuffling feet fading down the hall. My lawyer tapped my shoulder, muttered something about appeals, but his voice blurred like static. All I could hear was that one word, pathetic. By the time I stepped outside, the Houston sun was low, the air heavy. I should have gone home, locked the door, poured a drink. But home didn't feel like mine anymore. So I drove instead, aimlessly, until the streetlights started flickering on. My truck rolled up Evelyn's driveway, my mother's house, the one place I thought might still feel steady. Inside, the smell of pot roast hit me, but it didn't comfort me the way it used to. My brothers and sisters had already gathered, plates set, laughter forced. Bryony, my daughter, sat at the end of the table, shoulders hunched. I pulled out a chair. The scrape of wood against tile felt louder than it should. I waited for someone to ask, just one person to say, "How did it go today, Alden?" But the room went still. Evelyn stirred her tea slowly, her spoon clinking against porcelain, never once meeting my eyes. Ira sat right beside her, his hand casually resting over hers like he owned more than just my father's chair. Marla, glowing like she'd just won a prize, leaned in to whisper something in his ear. He chuckled, deep and satisfied. The silence wasn't absence, it was judgment. I chewed the food without tasting it, hearing every tick of the clock, every soft laugh between them. My chest burned hotter with each glance they exchanged. Bryony looked up at me once. Her eyes were wide, sad, but she said nothing. She pressed her lips together like she wanted to speak, then looked down at her plate. She was just 20, and even she knew no one at that table wanted to hear my side. I swallowed back words that clawed at my throat. If I spoke, they'd dismiss me. If I stayed quiet, I'd keep my dignity, or what was left of it. That silence weighed more than Marla's insult. It felt like I wasn't even there. Forks clinked, the pot roast passed around, conversation carefully danced around the elephant in the room. My ruin. I wanted to slam my fist down, demand they acknowledge me, but instead I sat, listening to the hum of small talk while my world caved in. As I drove away later, the night pressing down heavy, I realized something chilling. Maybe this wasn't just today. Maybe I'd always been invisible, the youngest son, the one overlooked, the one expected to swallow and move on. That night, I walked out of the house in silence, but what I didn't know was that betrayal had just begun. I didn't sleep that night. I just laid there, fully clothed, shoes still on, staring up at the ceiling of that quiet rental apartment where the walls felt too close and the silence felt louder than any courtroom gavel. Something about that dinner stuck in my gut, like I'd swallowed glass and couldn't cough it back up. At dawn, I got in the truck. My hands were shaking, not from cold, but from the weight of what was becoming clearer. I wasn't just losing things, I was being erased. I drove across town to Dorian's place. He was the only person left I thought I could still trust. We'd known each other since second grade. T-ball, fishing trips, late-night study crams. Dorian Hask was the guy who stood next to me when my dad passed, the one who toasted me at my wedding. He knew me better than my own brothers. His house sat behind a worn-out gate, same old dent in the mailbox. I didn't bother knocking. We always walked into each other's homes. That was our thing. I stepped into the hallway, heard his voice drifting from the den. He didn't hear me come in. Didn't know I was there. Well, yeah, he didn't contest that clause, Dorian was saying. We made sure the property title was airtight. Look, Marla, if he tries anything, it won't stick. I stopped cold. There was a pause on the line, her voice faint but unmistakable. Then Dorian again. You're welcome. You played it just right. I took a step back, the floor creaking beneath my boot. He turned, startled, phone still pressed to his cheek. His eyes widened. Alden. Wait. You advising her? I asked. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through him like a blade. You helped her take the ranch? He opened his mouth, then closed it. Couldn't even meet my eyes. I didn't mean to hurt you, man, he finally said, running a hand through his thinning hair. It wasn't personal. She came to me and, look, you've always landed on your feet. There was no apology in his tone, just convenience. Like I was supposed to understand. You know what hurts worse than losing a home? I said. Finding out your best friend sold the map. He didn't reply. I walked out. On the way back to my truck, I stopped at a red light and sat still as traffic passed. I wasn't angry in the loud way. I wasn't yelling or punching the steering wheel. No, it was deeper than that. It was the kind of hurt that made you rethink your entire damn life. When I finally got back to Evelyn's, Bryony was waiting outside with a small box in her hand. I know it's dumb, she said, handing it to me, but I saw them at the bakery this morning and thought maybe you'd want one. I opened it. Cannoli. My favorite. Her favorite too, when she was little. Every Friday after school, we'd split one on the porch steps back at the ranch. Thanks, sweetheart, I said. Means more than you know. She nodded and went back inside. I followed, slower. That evening, the family gathered again. Apparently, Ira had something to say about the future of the estate now that the trial was done. It wasn't a real conversation. It was theater. He just wanted to talk about money. I set the box of cannoli near my seat at the dining table and sat quietly, listening as Ira droned on about maximizing assets. Marla was already half a glass of wine in, smiling like she'd been crowned. At some point, I got up to get more water. When I came back, the box was gone. I glanced around. It took me a few seconds before I spotted it, sitting right on top of the trash. Untouched, still tied with ribbon. No one looked at me. Not one person acknowledged what they'd done. It wasn't about the pastry, it was about what it represented. That memory, that piece of my past with Bryony, thrown away like it never mattered. It wasn't anger that rose up in me. It was something heavier. I thought of my father, who used to tell me, loyalty isn't loud, but when it's gone, you feel the silence. And I thought of Silas, my uncle, who always said this family kept secrets buried deeper than the fence posts. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just now starting to dig in the right place. That night, lying awake, I realized the smallest humiliations were leading to something far bigger. I got up that morning with a stiff back and a heavier chest. The air in my lungs felt too tight, like breathing itself was being rationed. That ranch, the one I'd spent years building, board by board, was now just a memory stamped with Marla's smirk and Ira's voice telling me to move on like a man. Still, when Bryony mentioned the extended family dinner that weekend, I figured showing up might help. Maybe someone would see past the dust they'd tried to sweep me under. I took my time driving out there. The sun was setting by the time I pulled into the gravel drive, headlights catching the same fence I'd once painted with my father. Strange how everything looked smaller now. The house was loud with laughter before I even reached the porch. Sounds spilled through the screen door, clinking glasses, someone tuning a guitar. Normal sounds, familiar, comforting, even. Until I stepped inside. There was a seating chart, not just place cards. A laminated chart on the buffet table like we were hosting a charity gala. My name was listed last, positioned at the far corner of the long table. When I followed it, I found the card stuck awkwardly between the kitchen swing door and the guest bathroom. The chair creaked like it hadn't been touched in years. I looked up toward the head of the table, Marla, sitting pretty next to Ira, sipping white wine like she'd grown up on this land. Dorian was 2 seats from her, deep in conversation with my cousin Kent, both laughing hard enough to slap the table. I stood there, still holding my jacket. No one turned their head. No one said, "Alden, come join us up here," or even offered a nod. I placed my jacket over the back of the chair like it weighed 20 pounds and lowered myself down. The overhead light above me flickered, probably hadn't been fixed in months, and the scent of bathroom disinfectant drifted in and out every time someone pushed the swing door behind me. Dinner began. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans from the garden out back, the same recipes Mom used to make. Everyone passed plates, poured wine, told stories about some business merger Ira had just landed. I tried to chime in. "Hey, remember when we used to chase fireflies in that field? That spot by the creek?" Silence, like I'd cleared my throat at a funeral. Someone coughed. Then Marla smiled brightly and said, "So anyway, Ira, about the tax filing," and the laughter picked up again, as if I hadn't spoken at all. It happened again a few minutes later. Dorian mentioned some drought-proof fencing. I built that damn fence. I think we tested the first section over by the pecan trees. Remember? Blank stares. Then Bryony shifted in her seat across the table. She looked like she wanted to say something. Her eyes met mine for just a heartbeat, and then dropped back to her plate. I'd never felt more invisible in a room full of people I used to love. Forks clinked, and chairs scraped. I sat still, chewing slow, feeling every bite like dry dust in my mouth. Eventually, Ira stood, glass in hand. "Let's raise a toast. To family, to strength, and to new beginnings." The word "new" stung like a slap. Everyone raised their glass. I raised nothing. They didn't notice. I scanned that table. I remembered every inch of it. I'd carved my initials underneath when I was 11. Mom cried when she found out, then later said it was the mark of a builder. I built this life. I did. And now, somehow, I was the outsider. I looked around the room, at the rug I bought from Santa Fe, the light fixtures I installed, the painting near the fireplace that Bryony and I picked out together. I was everywhere in that house, and yet nowhere in their eyes. You don't have to shout to be erased. Sometimes all it takes is for everyone to stop listening. By dessert, I stopped speaking altogether. I left before the coffee came out. As I stepped out onto the porch, the evening breeze did nothing to cool the heat rising in my chest. I didn't slam the door. I didn't shout. I didn't even look back. But humiliation has a strange way of hardening into resolve, and mine was about to be tested. I parked by the old barn, same spot I used to back the trailer in when hauling hay, and just sat for a moment. The meeting was set for 11 a.m., but I'd come early, hoping the air might feel lighter without everyone's voices bouncing around. It didn't. The silence felt thick, like the ranch itself was bracing for something ugly. 1 week had passed since that dinner. I hadn't spoken to Bryony since. Dorian hadn't returned a call. And Marla? She hadn't needed to. Her silence was more pointed than any message. As I walked toward the house, I passed the front porch and saw the rocking chair I fixed for Mom 2 summers ago. Still there, still creaking with the wind. A part of me almost turned back, but I kept going. Inside, they'd gathered around the long oak table in the sunroom, what used to be the mudroom until I renovated it years ago. Bryony sat closest to the window, fiddling with the hem of her sleeve. Ira stood at the head, talking as if he were already delivering a eulogy. "Legacy is not about possession," he said, sweeping his hand like some southern preacher. "It's about stewardship, about passing something on in better shape than you found it." I stayed standing for a beat. No one offered me a chair. Dorian looked up and gave me a weak smile, the kind that says, I already know what's coming, and I'm not stopping it. Marla didn't smile at all. Then Ira gestured toward the man in the corner. This is Mr. Shales. He's our attorney. He's here to walk us through the operational structure going forward. Shales opened his folder and began reading, his voice smooth and practiced. Effective immediately, operational control of the Kelm Ranch Holdings LLC will shift to a co-management structure under Ira Kelm and Dorian Hask. Per agreement and board approval, I stopped listening. I looked at the document on the table. My name, Alden Kelm, was typed in bold. Then crossed out, not with a black line. Red ink, deliberate, like someone wanted it to sting. I looked to Bryony. Her eyes were on the paper, lips pressed tight. She didn't look up. Marla finally spoke. You weren't blindsided, Alden. You've always known this place needed order, and lately, she let the sentence hang like bait. Dorian chimed in, not even glancing my way. It's not personal. It's just business. Stability matters. Stability. That's what they called it now. Kicking a man out of his own sweat and blood. Ira cleared his throat. We all respect what you've done, Alden, but you've always had a hard time with structure. You think with your heart, and ranching, it's a business. I turned to Bryony again, hoping she'd say something, but her eyes never left the table. Maybe she couldn't speak, or maybe she chose not to. Respect? I said, my voice too calm for how I felt. You respect me so much you had me crossed out like a mistake on a grocery list? Ira raised a hand, trying to act like a mediator. Don't make this emotional. I built this place I said, stepping forward. Before Marla. Before Dorian ever set foot on this land, every fence post, every barn door, my hands. Dorian leaned back in his chair. And now it's time for capable hands to carry it forward. That word again, capable, as if mine were suddenly useless. Marla picked up her pen. If you have something you'd like to propose, do it through the proper channels. We're done with scenes. Scenes. That's what they'd reduce me to. An embarrassment, a loose end. Shales passed around another set of documents, but none made their way to me. I didn't sign a thing. I didn't touch a page. I just stood there watching as my life was repackaged and redistributed like some distant relative's estate. They weren't just moving forward. They were rewriting the story, and in their version, I never mattered. Outside, the sun hit the front porch just right, making the dust in the air look like gold. I stood there for a while, hands on the rail. I didn't feel anger exactly. Not yet. It was something quieter, sharper. If they thought silence meant surrender, they'd miscalculated. This wasn't over. And when I tried to speak, they didn't shout me down. They simply smothered me with silence as if I were already gone. I walked out of that meeting like a ghost, but not the kind that haunts others, more like the kind that's already been forgotten. 2 weeks later, I found myself in a courthouse conference room. Same stale coffee smell, same buzz of fluorescent lights. But this time, I wasn't waiting on a fair fight. I was waiting to be buried, slowly, under paper and pretense. Judge Warner entered without a glance. Marla followed behind, calm as a woman walking into a Sunday brunch. Her attorney, Mr. Shales, opened his briefcase with the kind of confidence that only comes from knowing the deck's been stacked. I took my seat at the far end of the table. No greetings, no nods, just papers shuffled and quiet tension crawling up my spine. Shales started his speech with legal jargon I didn't fully catch, something about financial mismanagement, emotional instability, and a pattern of erratic decision-making. It didn't feel like he was reading from notes. It felt rehearsed. Then came the witnesses. 2 subcontractors I hadn't seen in almost a decade. Men I hired back when the barn roof was caving in and no one else would take the job during storm season. One claimed I'd delayed payments, the other hinted I'd pressured him into cutting corners. I could barely recognize their faces, but they recited lines like they'd been coached for weeks. I leaned forward to speak, but Shales cut in before I could finish a breath. That's hearsay, Your Honor, he said sharply. Judge Warner didn't even blink. He just nodded, barely looking up. Then came Marla. She stood, smoothed her blouse, turned toward me like an actress facing her final monologue. You're pathetic, Alden, she said, clear as day. Always were. Always will be. No objection. No gavel. Just the hum of the HVAC and the sound of me cracking, piece by piece. I looked around the room. No one flinched. Not even Dorian, who kept his eyes on the wall behind me. Bryony, sitting in the corner, started to rise as if to speak, but Shales beat her to it. Objection! Irrelevant testimony. Judge Warner waved his hand, dismissing her before she could form a full sentence. And that was it. Court adjourned. I didn't even hear the words. I just stood up, walked out, and kept walking until I couldn't see the courthouse anymore. Later that night, I sat in my apartment, a place that barely had enough room for my boots and the bitter taste of what my life had become. The walls were yellow from age, the floor creaked with every step, and the ceiling fan clicked like a slow, mocking clock. Half a bottle of bourbon stood beside a pile of legal papers. The TV flickered in the background, playing some sitcom laugh track that felt like a punchline to my whole damn life. I stared at the ceiling, counting every betrayal like scars on the inside of my ribs. I thought about the ranch, about the tools still hanging in the shed, about the worn gloves Bryony once gave me for Father's Day, back when she thought I was invincible. Now she wouldn't even meet my eyes. Marla's voice echoed in my head. Pathetic. I poured another glass, sat back, wondered what it would feel like to just disappear. Would anyone notice? Would it even matter? A soft knock came from the hallway, probably the neighbor checking if I left the trash out again. I didn't answer. Silence had followed me home. It lived here now. I stared at the pile of paperwork again, trying to remember when things started unraveling. Was it when I first trusted Dorian? When I let Ira help with the books? Or was it way back, when I started believing that loyalty was something you could count on? Outside, the streetlights buzzed. The world kept going. But in that apartment, time stopped. Not because I wanted it to, but because I couldn't figure out how to make it move forward again. I gripped the glass, stared at the reflection of my face in the darkened TV screen. I built everything, I whispered. And now I'm not even part of it. The drink burned going down, but not enough to dull anything. For the first time in my life, I understood how silence could be a weapon. Not loud, not cruel, just empty. And in that emptiness, every lie could thrive, every truth could die, and a man could vanish without anyone having to lift a finger. I thought that was the end of me, until the phone rang with a voice that shattered everything I thought I knew. The phone rang just past midnight. It didn't startle me. I was already awake, sitting in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of the old pipes. The half-empty bottle sat untouched since the last sip. I stared at it like a question I couldn't answer. I picked up without checking the screen. Mr. Alden Kelm? The voice was calm, European, precise, like it had been trained not to shake. Speaking, I replied, wary. No one called me at that hour with good news. This is Simon Keller. I represent Union Helvetia Bank in Zurich. I hope I'm not disturbing you. He paused, maybe expecting me to say something polite. I didn't. I'm calling regarding a dormant account established by Mr. Rowan Kelm, your late uncle. I sat up straighter. Rowan? Yes, sir. The account has been inactive for over 15 years. Our records indicate you are the primary beneficiary. Wait, what are you talking about? Simon continued, unbothered by my confusion. Your uncle established a long-term trust fund. The current balance is approximately 99 million US dollars. I blinked. You're joking. I assure you I'm not. However, the terms of the trust include very specific conditions for its release. I stood up and began pacing, gripping the phone harder. What kind of conditions? He hesitated. Mr. Rowan Kelm stipulated that the funds were to be accessible only after confirmation that you were no longer legally married. I stopped in my tracks. What? The language is clear. The inheritance was contingent on your legal separation or divorce. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. Simon added, There's also a letter, written by your uncle. It's sealed in our private vault and addressed to you. I sat back down slowly. My chest felt tight, not from fear, but from a strange sensation I hadn't felt in months. Possibility. Simon went on, We would like to invite you to Zurich to authenticate your identity and review the documents in person. All travel expenses will be covered by the estate. I stared at the ceiling. Why didn't anyone tell me about this before? The trust was structured to activate only when your marital status changed legally. It's likely your uncle wanted this to remain undiscovered until the appropriate time. I didn't know what to say. Everything felt upside down. Simon softened his tone. Do you have any questions at this point? I shook my head, then realized he couldn't see me. Yeah, just one. Yes? Is this real? There was the briefest pause before he said, Yes, Mr. Kelm, it's very real. After we hung up, I sat there in silence for a long time, phone still in hand. My head spun. 99 million. Uncle Rowan. A plan set in motion years ago, one that waited for me to fall before offering a hand. I opened my contacts and scrolled to Bryony. She answered on the second ring, her voice sleepy and cautious. Dad, I got a call. From Switzerland. Uncle Rowan left something. A lot, actually. She was quiet. Then came a whisper. Dad, maybe this is your chance. I don't know why, but that cracked something in me. Not pain, something lighter, like a door opening just a sliver. When do you leave? She asked. Soon, I replied. They want me to come as soon as I can. Go. The line went silent again, but this time it wasn't cold. It felt like understanding. The next morning, I packed the one suit I owned, along with an old leather folder that held everything official left in my name, my ID, my divorce papers, my life reduced to documentation. At the airport, I moved through security in a daze. It wasn't until we took off, the plane banking east over the Gulf, that the gravity of it all began to land. Rowan, he had always been different, always watching. He never liked Marla, never trusted the way Ira wormed into the family business. He used to say strange things when I was a teenager, things I thought were nonsense. You gotta lose the roof before you remember the sky, he once said, out on the range. Back then, I laughed. Now, I wasn't so sure. The flight was long and sleepless. I kept replaying every word Simon said, every silence Bryony filled, every scar Marla left. Zurich was cold when I landed. Clean, sharp. The kind of city where even the streets looked deliberate. A driver held a sign with my name, and we rode in silence through the orderly neighborhoods until we reached the bank. I was led to a private room with glass walls, warm lighting, and a polished table that reflected my reflection back at me. Older, leaner, but finally, alert. Simon entered, greeted me with a firm handshake, then placed a sealed envelope on the table. For you, he said. I picked it up, hands trembling slightly. The writing was unmistakable. Rowan's cursive, bold, and slanted. Inside was a single page. Tommy, it began, my old family nickname, long buried. They won't see you coming. That's good. You needed to disappear before you could return. Let them think they've won. You know better now. This land, this name, it's still yours. But you've got to remember who you are before you fight to take it back. No signature. Just those words, enough to light a fire. I looked at Simon. What happens next? He smiled slightly. That's entirely up to you. For the first time in what felt like years, I stood up with purpose. I thought Zurich would just give me money. Instead, it gave me the truth about who my uncle was and who I needed to become. The next morning, Zurich wore a soft gray mist, like the city itself was unsure if it wanted to reveal too much too soon. I arrived at Simon Keller's office just after 9. He greeted me with the same calm professionalism, but there was something different in his tone now. Less formal, more human. This way, Mr. Kelm. We walked past a corridor of frosted glass panels until we reached a room with no windows, only warm wooden walls and a single leather folder on the center of the table. This belonged to your uncle, he said. He asked it be delivered to you personally, should the conditions of the trust ever be met. Simon stepped back and left me alone. I opened the folder. Inside were several envelopes, each dated in Rowan's familiar handwriting. Some yellowed with age, others still crisp. They smelled faintly of tobacco and cedar. I took the first one and unfolded it. "Tommy," it began, "I've watched you from a distance because I had to. Your mother didn't want me too close, said I was too blunt for boys. But I saw you. You build things with your hands, but you lead with your heart. That kind of man doesn't always win, but he outlasts the ones who do." I paused, already feeling a tightness forming in my chest. The second letter, written a year later, held no greetings, just blunt observations. "She doesn't love you, son. She loves the idea of winning you. Mark my words, one day you'll need distance to see the shape of what she took from you." Marla. He had seen it coming. All of it. By the fourth letter, my hands were trembling. It was dated just weeks before his passing. "If you're reading this, it means she's gone, or you're finally free. I made sure this money would only find you once the chains were off. You don't need to punish her. Life will take care of that. Just don't let her define your worth." That's what they all do when they lose power. They rewrite the story to make you the villain. I closed my eyes and pressed the paper to my chest. Someone had seen me. Not the version Marla twisted in court, not the disappointment Ira scoffed at, not the man Dorian abandoned when it got uncomfortable. Rowan had seen me years ago and believed I was worth saving. When Simon returned, he slid another document across the table. "This authorizes the release of the funds," he said. "All that's needed is your signature." I stared at the pen in his hand but didn't take it. "Can I think about it?" I asked. Simon nodded slowly. "Of course, but if I may, this account is yours. It's waiting." "I'm not," I said quietly. "Not yet." He didn't push, just collected the paper and excused himself once again. The money was real, but Rowan's words rang louder. "Money is a mirror. It shows you who you are, not who you wish to be." Back at the hotel that night, I sat near the window watching the lights along the river. My phone buzzed once. Bryony. I answered immediately. "Hey," I said, voice rough. "You okay?" "I'm still breathing." There was a pause, then her voice softened. "I've been thinking about something." "Yeah?" "You don't have to fight them with fists, Dad. Fight them by living better than they ever imagined. You do that, and you win." I swallowed hard. "Where'd you learn to talk like that?" "You, once," she whispered, "before they tried to make me forget." That stayed with me long after the call ended. I poured a glass of water, not whiskey, sat with the letters again, reread every line, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a broken man trying to hold on. I felt like a man about to rebuild. They thought they'd erased me. They forgot I came from Rowan's blood, and blood remembers. Zurich felt far behind me, like it belonged to another life. I landed back in Houston with no fanfare, no welcome party, just heat thick enough to wrap around your ribs and squeeze. But something in me had changed, not louder, not angrier, just steadier. The next morning, a courier envelope slid under the door of my apartment. Inside, a court summons. Ira and Marla had filed new claims, accusing me of laundering money overseas to avoid joint marital obligations. A strategic delay of disclosure, they called it. Their timing, impeccable. Their proof, forged. I sat at the kitchen table, unfolded the documents, and let out a slow, bitter laugh. This wasn't just a counterattack. It was desperation dressed up in legal language. By Thursday, I was back in the courthouse. Same judge, same stiff benches, same air of something rotten being politely ignored. Marla wore a tailored beige suit, pearl earrings, and a smile that could slice granite. Ira, beside her, adjusted his cuffs like he had a reputation to protect. Dorian didn't bother to show. Bryony sat quietly in the back near the door. Her eyes found mine. She nodded once. That was all I needed. The hearing began. Their lawyer, a younger guy with too much gel in his hair, stood and delivered his thunder. He waved papers like swords, claimed I had willfully concealed assets overseas, that I'd endangered the estate by engaging with illegitimate offshore accounts. He called the Swiss inheritance a convenient post-divorce discovery. The judge furrowed his brow. The audience leaned forward. I stayed seated. When it was my turn, I stood, not with bluster, but with clarity. Your Honor, I said, I'd like to introduce Mr. Simon Keller of Gallon Private Banking Group. He'll be joining us remotely. A screen lit up. Simon appeared, crisp in his Zurich office. Behind him, a bank seal shimmered on frosted glass. Over the next 10 minutes, he dismantled every lie. He confirmed the account's origin, established by Rowan Kelm over 15 years ago. He read verbatim the clauses from Rowan's will, stipulating release of the funds only upon the dissolution of my marriage for protection against predatory manipulation. Then came the letters, digitized, dated, authenticated. He read one aloud, slowly. If Tommy is reading this, it means I was right, that someone tried to erase him. But the truth can't be buried forever. The room was silent. Even Judge Warner sat back in his chair, lips pressed thin. Marla's eyes darted. Ira looked like he wanted to melt into his shoes. Then I stepped forward. I looked at them both, two people who had hollowed me out and expected me to stay quiet. You called me pathetic, I said, steady as stone. Said I was a fool with calloused hands. But you built your comfort on my back. Every beam on that ranch, I nailed it. Every debt paid. My sweat. And when you were done using me, you tried to paint me a criminal to cover your own rot. I turned to the judge. I haven't asked for vengeance. I've only asked to be allowed to breathe again. He didn't respond immediately, but the gavel came down a few minutes later. All new claims denied. Further pursuit of asset accusations forbidden without federal intervention. And then, his final note, sharp as a nail in a coffin. This court finds the recent filings by Mrs. Vey and Mr. Kelm to be in bad faith, bordering on fraudulent misrepresentation. Marla didn't move. Ira stared ahead, as if hoping to wake up from the wreckage. I didn't linger. I nodded to Bryony on the way out. She followed me, silent, until we reached the courthouse steps. You okay? She asked. I will be. She gave me a small smile. You didn't just stand up to them. You ended it. No, I said. I ended their story. Mine's still being written. That night I didn't drink. Didn't call anyone. Just sat on the porch of the small duplex I rented on the edge of town. The sky above Houston was quiet for once. No lightning. No judgment. Just stillness. And somewhere in that silence, I realized something. Victory doesn't erase scars, but it does give you room to heal. It had rained the night before, one of those slow, soaking Texas rains that doesn't rush, just settles in and reminds the land it's still alive. The dirt road leading up to the ranch was slick with mud, but I didn't mind. I rolled the window down, let the scent of wet mesquite and pine drift through the truck. When the house came into view, I parked and stepped out slowly, like I was walking into a memory. The front porch still creaked under my boots. The screen door still hung slightly crooked. But the name etched into the wooden beam above the doorway, Kelm Ranch, hadn't been touched. They tried to erase me, but they couldn't erase what I built, not permanently. Inside, the place was quiet. Bryony had already come by earlier in the week to help air the rooms out and stock the cabinets. She didn't say much, just brought groceries, left a pie on the counter like Mom used to, and squeezed my arm before she left. I stood in the center of the kitchen now, fingers trailing the worn wood of the table I'd refinished back in my 20s. My reflection caught in the glass of the old hutch, lined, grayer, but not broken, not anymore. Out by the barn, the land stretched wide and green. I walked the fence line slowly, replaced a rotted board, checked the latches, fed the horses. It was all mine again. Not because I fought harder, but because I finally stopped fighting for approval from people who never intended to give it. That evening, the townsfolk held a small gathering at the local hall, something Bryony had quietly arranged. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go, but I did. Faces I hadn't seen in years greeted me, some embarrassed, some proud, some just real. Folks who knew me before the courtrooms and the whisper campaigns, folks who remembered the barn raisings, the cattle auctions, the late nights helping neighbors mend roofs after storms. And then there were the silent glances. Marla sitting alone on a bench outside, smoking a cigarette like the world owed her something. No one sat with her. Not anymore. I didn't gloat, didn't speak to her, just nodded once in her direction as I walked past, like acknowledging a wind that had once knocked me down but couldn't move me anymore. Back home that night, I lit a fire in the hearth and sat with a glass of water. No bourbon, no need to drown anything now. The house crackled with the sound of settling beams and burning oak. Bryony called just before I turned in. "You did it," she said. "I didn't win everything," I replied, "but I got back what mattered. I'm sorry I didn't believe you sooner." I let that sit for a second, then said, "We all survived our way." She was quiet, but I could hear the relief in her breath. After we hung up, I sat in front of the fire a while longer. Simon had sent one last message earlier that day, a scanned letter from Rowan's files. "To the man you were always meant to become, you don't need permission to be whole, just the truth, and the will to walk in it." Rowan had seen me, long before I saw myself. I stood, stretched, and walked outside. The air was crisp, coyotes howled faint in the distance, stars thick above the tree line. And somewhere in that silence I remembered the word they'd tried to beat into me like a curse. Pathetic. I whispered it once, not bitterly, not with shame, just enough to feel the weight of it one last time. Then I smiled. Pathetic is what they became chasing lies, not me. And for the first time in decades, I wasn't anyone's disappointment. I was simply myself.